We're doing preface today with Shang. We figured that given the feedback from last time with the foreword, just me doing it solo, I realized that reading it and also interpreting it and all just trying to juggle all these things all at the same time is a little difficult. So we're going to go about it this way, where Shang and I are having a conversation, reading the book together, which, is the way critical reading class is led and run. So, yeah, you got anything you want to say before we start?
I'm a voracious reader, and I'm very happy to be doing this.
This is very exciting. We'll see how it goes. So today we're doing preface of Closing Up the American Mind. If you don't know what the book is, check out my other video with the foreword, brief introduction, or you could just Wikipedia it yourself. Yeah. Other than that, take it away.
Preface. This essay, a meditation on the state of our souls, particularly those of the young and their education, is written from the perspective of a teacher. Such a perspective, although it has grave limitations and is accompanied by dangerous temptations, is a privileged one. The teacher, particularly the teacher dedicated to liberal education, must constantly try to look toward the goal of human completeness and back at the natures of his students here and now, ever seeking to understand the former and to assess the capacities of the latter to approach it. Attention to the young, knowing what their hungers are and what they can digest, is the essence of the craft. One must spy out and elicit those hungers, for there is no real education that does not respond to felt need. Anything else acquired is trifling display.
Right. What do you think?
I was about to ask you what's going on.
Right. It's this idea of, he's taken a stance on what it means to be a teacher, right? The teacher, particularly the teacher dedicated to liberal education, must constantly try to look toward the goal of human completeness and back at the natures of his student here and now, ever seeking to understand the former and to assess the capacities of the latter to approach it. Attention to the young, knowing what their hungers are and what they can digest, is the essence of the craft, right? Critical reading, and I think working with students, is like this constant understanding of whether or not I'm actually answering their questions, whether or not this is like synced up with what they're thinking of, whether or not the examples we're providing is helping them understand, right? I believe you can also say the same thing for your SATs, right? That when you're teaching, people have questions, it's an immediate felt response, and it's not about the proof of like how much they know on a test, right? So this is what he's saying. You got any thoughts?
So, human completeness, as a teacher, we should always be looking for the qualities that every complete or ideal human being should strive to be, and just sort of fill in the gaps,
right,
for people or students who are just lacking those essential qualities.
Right. So you're not trying to teach them what to think. You show them all these different paths that they then choose to take on their own, right?
What each generation is can best be discovered in its relation to the permanent concerns of mankind. This in turn can best be discovered in each generation's tastes, amusements, and especially angers. This is above all true in an age that prides itself on calm awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly revealing are the various impostors whose business it is to appeal to the young. These culture peddlers have the strongest of motives for finding out the appetites of the young, so they are useful guides into the labyrinths of the spirit of the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, we can definitely think back on our own situation. And I feel like this is extremely relevant about cultural peddlers and big data. Big data is pretty much the most aggressive culture peddler, right? Telling us what to think, showing us these things, having these algorithms that come up on our walls and tell us like this is the appetites, the taste that you should have, right? The teacher's standpoint is not arbitrary. It is neither simply dependent on what students think they want or happen to be in this place or time, nor is it imposed on him by the demands of a particular society or the vagaries of the market. Although much effort has been expended in trying to prove that the teacher is always the agent of such forces, in fact, he is willingly guided by the awareness or the divination that there is a human nature and that assisting its fulfillment is his task. right? So you're nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was reminded before earlier of the culture peddlers. I was actually thinking of traditional advertising.
Yeah,
You know, like brands such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or even car companies. You know, they were designed to appeal to kids, to build that brand name like in these kids' minds. So by the time they actually grow up, they're automatically purchasing that Lexus or that Ford, right? Or that name brand without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
Subconsciously.
Right. He does not come to this by way of abstraction or complicated reasoning. He sees it in the eyes of his students. Those students are only potential, but potential beyond itself. And this is the source of the hope, almost always disappointed, but ever reticent, that man is not just a creature of accident, chained to and formed by the particular cave in which he is born. Right? I think Allan Bloom writes in such a poetic language with references to obviously Plato's cave, right? And that, you know, I kind of smile reading a passage like this because those students are only potential, but potential points beyond itself. That's exactly the definition of potential. That there is a peak that you can actually march towards to, and you can actually attain something higher. That's what potential means. If you've met your potential, then you're actually not growing anymore, right? And this is a source of the hope, almost always disappointed, but ever innocent, that man is not just a creature of accident chained by it. So, you know, like as a teacher, Allan Bloom also feels that he sees these potentials, and oftentimes these potentials just go wasted. And I believe you and I both see that a lot. And, you know, it's tragic because it's not because they intentionally waste it, but it's just because of society, because of the times, because of all these currents, right? Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a deep and, you know, obscure cave to get out of.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't even understand that there is an above ground
to
that underground, and it's all that you know are shadows. I mean, those shadows are as real as it gets. That's the only experience you've ever had from beginning to end.
All right, let's keep going.
Midwifery, the delivery of real babies of which not the midwife, but nature is the cause, describes teaching more adequately than does the word socialization. The birth of a robust child, independent of the midwife, is the teacher's true joy, a pleasure far more effective in motivating him than any disinterested moral duty would be, his primary experience of a contemplation more satisfying than any action. No real teacher can doubt that his task is to assist his pupil to fulfill human nature against all the deforming forces of convention and prejudice. The vision of what that nature is may be clouded, the teacher may be more or less limited, but his activity is solicited by something beyond him that at the same time provides him with a standard for judging his student's capacity and achievement. Moreover, there is no real teacher who in practice does not believe in the existence of the soul, or in a magic that acts on it through speech. The soul, so the teacher must think, may at the outset of education require extrinsic rewards and punishments to motivate its activity, but in the end, that activity is its own reward and is self-sufficient. Wow, so this is why you read Allan Bloom.
Right.
The way that he comes at this situation from a teacher's perspective, but merges the importance of the soul in helping human beings attain their true highest nature.
Yeah.
This is just a hodgepodge of everything that we ever talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
this is where I rip off all my ideas. Right? Like, how do you find reason to continue on as a teacher or as an educator? Read this guy, right? That paragraph alone is so much energy, gives you so much life to just push forth and do what you do, right? No real teacher can doubt that his task is to assist his pupil to fulfill human nature against all the deforming forces of convention and prejudice.
How powerful is that?
Wow, right? And the vision of what that nature is may be clouded. The teacher may be more or less limited, but his activity is solicited by something beyond him that at the same time provides him with a standard for judging his students' capacity and achievement. And moreover, there is no real teacher who in practice does not believe in the existence of the soul or in a magic that acts on it through speech. To me, that's just like, wow, like how else can you articulate a position to why you want to be a teacher?
Yeah.
You can't possibly argue for being a teacher on a material level. right? Like, if we're only talking about materials, about the end goal, like about making money, teaching is a dead-end job. It'll never make as much money as being in fintech, right? But the beautiful thing of this passage is that being a teacher is somewhat of a magician, right? How is it possible that something in my head is actually transferred to your head through speech, and that you're able to pick it up and then digest it, or even listen to it, not fully understand it, but maybe when you're showering or next morning when you wake up, that suddenly it clicks in your head. To me, I think that's magic. You know, and maybe even for you, teaching SATs, and you see the scores go up, right? Retroactively, you're like, oh yeah, because you teach well, you teach the methods, you teach the skills. But the fact that it was able to go from your hands onto the board, into their heads, and then apply to a test taken by themselves, right? And see the improvement is quite magical.
Absolutely.
In my view.
Yeah.
The soul, so the teacher must think, may at the outset of education require extrinsic rewards and punishment to motivate its activity. But in the end, that activity is its own reward and is self-sufficient.
Beautiful.
That's when I know I've succeeded as an educator, is that when the student actually comes and asks for more of these things for no other benefit than the fact that it motivates themselves to learn more. Right.
This reminds me of the quote, education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel with just facts and knowledge, right? Like once you spark that flame and that, you know, that kid is burning, he's got to figure it out. He's self-sufficient. He's on his way, right? He knows the path to take. And in a day and age in which, you know, there's more people who want to be a YouTuber than a lawyer or an educator, if we're trying to get more philosophers and teachers in the world, you know, God knows we need more of those. I mean, what better way to convince people to take on this task or responsibility by, you know, informing them that actually what you're really doing is you're helping people strive to their highest nature. He even describes education here as a form of transcendence. You know, despite your personal limitations as an instructor, whatever they may be, right? It's lack of experience, lack of knowledge, you're still learning the ropes. Just the fact that you have this intention in mind to spark this flame within the human soul, that transcendence already allows you to overcome any of these physical limitations.
There's no other way you can possibly argue to why you teach, right? Like I said already. And there's no other way to convince a student why they should come to class or why they should read classics. Because it's not material. There's no financial benefit to reap from something like this, at least not directly or intuitively. So yeah, like we can talk about this half of a paragraph for ages.
Well, I see why you've been like, you know, talking about this book so often now. You know, I just haven't gotten to it because it's like 300 plus pages, but
I still haven't finished the book, but like I keep reading the first 200 pages because there's that good. Let's keep going.
These are the reasons that help to explain the perversity of an adult who prefers the company of youths to that of grown-ups. He prefers the promising might be to the defective is. Such an adult is subject to many temptations, particularly vanity and the desire to propagandize rather than teach. And the very activity brings with it the danger of preferring teaching to knowing, of adapting oneself to what the students can or want to learn, of knowing oneself only by one's students.
I think it's funny. It's like talking about us, right? There's a perversity of an adult who prefers the company of youths to that of grown-ups, right? Because you see potential and you don't see the fuck-ups of people, right? Yep. And you're like, okay, I want to help these kids because all of these people out there are already FUBAR, right? For those of you guys that don't know what FUBAR means, go look it up yourself. But yeah. But he makes a really important comment, right? It's not about the desire to propagandize. And I think that's a very slippery slope for educators, is that you want to mold these kids into your own deformity. Yep. And that's the danger of being an educator, is like if you are enshrouded by your own ideologies and all you're obsessed with is to turn them into people like you, then you've actually corrupted the youth, right? And to me, it's like whenever I find a student that vehemently disagrees with me, that gives me life. I'm like, yes, like I keep pushing him and keep poking him towards the direction. And if they disagree with me, like, I need you to flesh out your argument and disagree with me better, right? And funny enough, like, eventually pushing far enough with the disagreement, we find ourselves meeting each other on the other side. It's just like the world is round, you know.
If you go so far left, you end up on the far right.
You're right, exactly. So, yeah, thus teaching can be a threat to philosophy because philosophizing is a solitary quest, and he who pursues it must never look to an audience. But it is too much to ask that teacher be philosophers, and a bit of attachment to one's audience is almost inevitable. And if it is well resisted, the very vice can turn into something of a virtue and encourage philosophizing. So I feel like this is exactly what we're doing here, right? Fascination with one student leads to an awareness of the various kinds of souls and their capacities for truth and error as well as learning. Such experience is a condition of investigating the question, what is man? What is human? In relation to its highest aspirations as opposed to his low and common needs. This is one of those questions that you're asked a lot, we talk about a lot, but nobody ever thinks deeply enough about it anymore, in my opinion. And this is the argument that convinced me that my liberal education was the right choice. If you read the next part.
A liberal education means precisely helping students to pose this question to themselves, to become aware that the answer is neither obvious nor simply unavailable, and that there is no serious life in which this question is not a continuous concern. Despite all the efforts to pervert it, a few of which will be discussed in this book, the question that every young person asks, who am I? The powerful urge to follow the Delphic command, know thyself, which is born in each of us, means in the first place, what is man? And in our chronic lack of certainty, this comes down to knowing the alternative answers and thinking about them. Liberal education provides access to these alternatives, many of which go against the grain of our nature or our times. The liberally educated person is one who is able to resist the easy and preferred answers, not because he is obstinate, but because he knows others worthy of consideration. Although it is foolish to believe that book learning is anything like the whole of education, it is always necessary, particularly in ages when there is a poverty of living examples of the highest human high human types. And book learning is most of what a teacher can give, properly administered in an atmosphere in which its relation to life is plausible. Life will happen to his students. The most he can hope is that what he might give will inform life. Most students will be content with what our present considers relevant. Others will have a spirit of enthusiasm that subsides as family and ambition provide them with other objects of interest. A small number will spend their lives in an effort to be autonomous. It is for these last, especially, that liberal education exists. They become the models for the use of the noblest human faculties, and hence are benefactors to all of us, more for what they are than for what they do. Without their presence, and one should add, without their being respectable, no society, no matter how rich or how comfortable, no matter how technically adept or full of tender sentiments, can be called civilized. From the teacher standpoint, thus understood, I have for more than 30 years, with the most intense interest, watched and listened to students.
So let's pause there and just break down this big paragraph that you just read. I think this is phenomenal, right? That the liberally educated person, I think it's right around the middle of the paragraph, is one who is able to resist the easy and preferred answers, not because he is obstinate, but because he knows others worthy of consideration, right? That the refusal to just lie down and go with the norm, go with the status quo, isn't because you are anti-establishment. It's because you believe there's actually more to what is establishment, right? So what is that more? You actually have to spend a lot of time discovering. And liberal education is a proven way to help you discover that thing beyond what is the status quo, right?
So it's essentially arming you with the tools to think for yourself, to decide on your own independently, right? What is right for you in this nuanced, complex, subjective of a world that we live in.
Exactly. And that's the thing that you need to answer the question, who am I? It's the things that you'll learn in liberal education, right?
And as you said, like other people can't answer that question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like you mentioned, like, teachers who are trying to just pass down their model of truth or their lens of how to see the world. They're doing a disservice and they're contaminating education.
Yes.
You're supposed to give kids the tools to figure out their own or to create their own reality.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's beautiful, right? Although it is foolish to believe that book learning is anything like the whole of education, it is always necessary, particularly in ages when there is a poverty of living examples of the possible high human types.
Mm.
And I feel like, a lot of what we do, it might just be a tiny drop in the bucket, right? We're only helping like a couple students, but it is important anyway, because it's really hard to find, like you said, like we have a poverty of living examples of the possible high human types. What does it mean to be courageous, right? Is Jordan Peterson an example of being courageous? Debatable. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right? What about David Goggins?
Hmm.
David Goggins is pretty courageous, but is he also rash? Right? And is he also not prudent?
Right.
Probably, right? There's a degree of disconnect of what it really means to be truly courageous for yourself, right? You can have all these high human types and role models, but it's really, really hard for you actually to just become them, right? Because at the end of the day, you have different set of experiences. But it is with these high human types or these, like you said, examples, right, that you can actually model yourself after and then find your own place in the universe. And book learning is most of what a teacher can give, properly administered in an atmosphere in which its relation to life is plausible. Right? I think this was kind of my secret curriculum or syllabus guideline to how to run critical reading at Meraki. It's just that we need to administer it in a way where the relation to life is plausible. Yeah. Life will happen. This, I think, is beautiful. Life will happen to his students. The most he can hope is that what he might give will inform life, right? All of our students that come through our doors are going to go on to college, are going to do great things, are going to find their jobs. But like the least we can do and the most we can hope for is that they can take what they learn in these classrooms, in these chairs, and help them with whatever adventure they decide to go on. We are not trying to tell you what path you should go, but we are trying to arm you with the knowledge, right, from these books, from our own experience of how whatever life you choose, whatever path you decide to go on, how to make it the most rewarding for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Most students will be content with what our president considers relevant. Others will have a spirit of enthusiasm that subsides as family and ambition provide them with other objects of interest. A small number will spend their lives in an effort to be autonomous. It is for these last, especially, that liberal education exists. Right? I think he sees it clear as day that not every student is going to be a philosopher, and that's okay. And that's the beauty of liberal education, is that every student that he meets, right, he doesn't expect them to be like him. He just knows, right? They become the models for the noblest of human types, human faculties, and hence are benefactors to all of us, right? More of what they are than for what they do. More of what they are than for what they do. They might not be very productive human beings, as in they're not engineers, right? They're not computer scientists, but they do live as great examples for those around them, right? And without their presence, no society, no matter how rich or comfortable, right? We are living in the richest times. No matter how technically adept or full of tender sentiments, literally our times, very technically adept, even more tender sentiments, right? Can be called civilized when we don't have liberally educated people.
When you don't have a few exemplars in society showing you the highest way of living.
Right. Just mudslinging all the time. If that's the highest ideal, then like we have no ideal. Right.
And so most people essentially just follow sort of the conventional path that's already good enough for them. Some people just get caught up with family responsibilities or, chasing money or chasing a great job. And it's these few, goes back to the 80-20 rule again. It's maybe this minority, 20% of people or even fewer, who are actually serving as these examples.
Yes.
We should live as.
Absolutely. Keep going.
From the teacher's standpoint, thus understood, I have for more than 30 years with the most intense interest watched and listened to students, what they bring to their higher education, and passions, curiosities, longings, and especially previous experience has changed. And therewith the task of educating them has changed. In this book, I am attempting to make a contribution to understanding this generation. I am not moralizing. I no more want to be Jeremiah than Pollyanna. More than anything else, this book is to be taken as a report from the front. The reader can judge for himself the gravity of our situation. Every age has its problems, and I do not claim that things were wonderful in the past. I am describing our present situation and do not intend any comparison with the past to be used as grounds for congratulating or blaming ourselves, but only for the sake of clarifying what counts for us and what is special in our situation. A word about my sample in this study. It consists of thousands of students of comparatively high intelligence, materially and spiritually free to do pretty much what they want with the few years of college they are privileged to have. In short, the kinds of young persons who populate the 20 or 30 best universities. There are other kinds of students whom circumstances of one sort or another prevent from having the freedom required to pursue a liberal education. They have their own needs and may very well have very different characters from those I describe here. My sample, whatever its limits, has the advantage of concentrating on those who are most likely to take advantage of a liberal education and to have the greatest moral and intellectual effect on the nation. It is sometimes said that these advantaged youths have less need of our attention and resources, that they already have enough, but they, above all, most need education, inasmuch as the greatest talents are most difficult to perfect, and the more complex the nature, the more susceptible it is to perversion. There is no need to prove the importance of education, but it should be remarked that for modern nations, which have founded themselves on reason and its various uses more than did any nations in the past, a crisis in the university, the home of reason, is perhaps the profoundest crisis they face.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this. You said this was written in the 80s?
1987.
This is still... well, it's not that it's just still so relevant. Like today, we're actually at a point where we're feeling these detrimental consequences that he's talking about. We're already feeling these.
Yeah.
We're already actually at the point in which we're facing and encountering kids who are products of this system that he's already talking about.
Yeah. Right. He says this book is to be taken as a report from the front. And by that, in his times, was supposed to mean being a college instructor and meeting these kids face to face, right? From the front lines. But from our context, the front means the past, right? Or at least for him, the future and what he's seeing and that where we're headed to, right? So I think it's quite incredible, right? The reader can judge for himself the gravity of our situation. That's our job as readers today, is to judge for ourselves, right? Whether or not he is making sense and whether or not he is true, right? And whether or not his observations are true. I do want to talk about the next paragraph. A word about my sample. It consists of thousands of students of comparatively high intelligence, materially and spiritually free to do pretty much what they want with the few years of college they are privileged to have. In short, the kind of young persons who populate the 20 or 30 best universities. Exactly the students that come through our doors, right? The students with the resources, the students that do end up with being in the best universities. They are kids with the material freedom to do pretty much whatever they want, but they don't. Most of them don't, right? There are other kinds of students whom circumstances of one sort or another prevent from having the freedom required to pursue a liberal education. They have their own needs and may very well have very different characteristics from these described here, right? But most of our students, most of the people that have the time to read these books or enjoy these conversations are people that are relatively privileged. And this is what I say a lot to the students that come here. that you want to clearly assess your situation. If you have the privilege and the luxury to do whatever you want, that you are not financially straddled, right? That you don't have to work right away to support your family, that your family is not dependent on your financial income. Take advantage of that and explore, right? And dive into the liberal arts. But I think that has kind of lost its incentive nowadays. We can keep going if you want.
This book has concentrated my mind on the experiences of a lifetime of teaching. Because my career has been an unusually happy one, gratitude is the leading sentiment evoked in reviewing it. My acknowledgments, therefore, reflect contributions to that total experience rather than to this particular book. So above all, I must thank all the students to whom I have had the privilege of teaching classic texts for more than 30 years, especially those I came to know well and from whom I learned so much about the questions discussed here. Keep reading?
Yep.
Among them are those old students, now very independent thinkers and friends, who have told me of their experiences and observations and helped me interpret mine.
Yeah. And it's just going through the list of thanks because it's the preface, right? Among my colleagues with whom I share conversations and students, I want to make mentions of Saul Bellow, right, the guy that wrote the foreword, and Werner J. Dannhauser. The former, with a special great generosity, entered into my thoughts and encouraged me in the path I had never taken before. The latter, my intellectual companion throughout my adult life, undertook, as usual, to read my manuscript and gave me the benefit of his penetration and honesty, right? Even someone like Bloom, wouldn't have been able to do this on his own. We talk about this a lot, that it does take a village to raise a child. You are never alone. And if you are alone, you would die really quickly. That's just the reality of things. And I think in our culture, we tend to glorify the sole entrepreneur, the person that did everything. But it actually is neglecting all of these extra forces out there that are helping you out. Like, even if you were a solo YouTuber, you're uploading it onto YouTube, which is a platform built by an entire company of people. So, like, how else are you going to make money from your videos, right? What about the cameras? What about the equipment that you use? All of this is connected. So there's no way you can do things entirely independently on your own, right? At least if you want to make an impact on the world. So it goes on to say in preparation of the manuscript, finally, I want to express my admiration for Allan P. Schindler, who has been for me the model of the selfless university man, his lifelong blah, blah, blah. I must say, and not only pro forma, that my mention of these persons in no way implies that they endorse my views.
He thanked people who disagree with him?
Mm-hmm. Can you believe that? I think that's hilarious,
That's
right?
unimaginable.
Right. That's really funny that he actually had to say, like, okay, by the way, these people don't necessarily endorse my views just because they're on here. Because he's actually about to go in and throw hands in the rest of the book and just like this what he sees as a corruption to higher education. But yeah, this is a really interesting format, and I think it actually stimulated a lot more conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you put it. I mean, during that time, as you said, the book was taken as a report from the front, and the war is still going on. It's just really low key, but we've already had enough time pass in which some of these veterans have come back, and we've seen some of these, products of the system. And yeah, we can see how much moralizing has done for this younger generation.
Right.
In terms of not being able to think on their own, in terms of being overly fragile and sensitive. And you see that in, skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression in the younger generation. I think all of these things are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer isn't because we have chlorine in the water because, we're teaching the wrong things. It's because we're not opening ourselves to the higher levels of human life, and we're all just looking for problems and solutions on the material level, right? In the same way that there's no justification for being a teacher and there's no justification for liberal arts on the material plane, you have to go beyond that to see reasons for why you exist, right? If you're only trying to think about a reason on the material plane, like making money, you're never going to find a satisfying answer. Art will definitely be very down on the list in terms of profitability and sustainability, right? A lot of times people talk about these things called, but is it sustainable? Right. Is it realistic? But is it practical? Well, that's the direct opposite of being a human being. Like, human beings are, by definition, very unrealistic, unsustainable, impractical beings, very wasteful. But that's how you live, right? That is human nature. And yeah, this is really good first run, I think.
It's the sterilizing of higher education.
Yeah. All right, great. I think we'll wrap it up here today and see how things go, right? I can see you in the reflection. Special guest. Shout out to Lisa, awesome editor. But yeah, so this is going to be the end, and thank you for watching. If you're still here, that this is a very fun, I think, beginning of a very long journey in the future to come, and very excited to have all of you, present, past, and future viewers, students, friends, teachers, to be part of this journey. Yeah, what do you think?
Peace out.
All right. Should we throw the outro? Just kidding. We need to find a different one. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good.
Cool.
Let's cut.
Awesome.